we go. Okay, Jeannie, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Well, hi everybody. I am Jeannie Deleplane. I am the Kinship and Guardianship Program Manager. And with me tonight, I brought Kate Schmidt, who is our adoption supervisor and support supervisor. We were supposed to have Melanie Myers with us, but she had a family emergency, so she had to pop off. And so Kate is taking her place. And so, Kate, you want to introduce yourself real fast?
Yes, hello. Thanks, Jeannie. Thank you for having me this evening. As Jeannie had said, I'm Kate Schmidt. I supervise the Adoption Support Program consultant. Typically, Melanie, our permanency administrator, gives this presentation with Jeannie. I'm happy to be here with all of you tonight, kind of hopping on late. Yeah, I'm just going to jump in and answer as many questions as I can, assist Jeannie with the presentation. And if there's any questions with regards to the adoption program, I'll try to answer those as best I can and then also follow up if needed. Also, another little bit of information. I have a little one home with me tonight, so I might be off camera, but still speaking. Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for
Thanks, Jeannie.
filling in. Thank you
Yes.
so much for filling in. So I just want to say tonight, our goal is to provide you with a lot of resources, a lot of information, so you can help understand a little bit more between the differences between guardianship and adoption. We want to provide you with a little bit of information to help inform what the best permanency outcome could be for a child. And we want you to think of this in the context of what is in the child's best interest as we talk today. I also just want to say to you, we have an enormous slide deck. And I don't know if any of you guys were there for the Children's Justice Conference, but this is the same slide deck that we used minus a couple of slides. And so it's pretty lengthy. I tried to get Luann to help me shave it down, but she said you guys wanted to know everything. And so we left it in. But I think what you're going to see us do is go through this pretty quickly so we have a little bit of time to take questions. So let's just start at the beginning and say permanency planning. It starts when first contact occurs and continues until permanency is achieved. Now, our number one goal is to send kids home to their families. That's the number one goal. We want to send kids home to their parents. That's what we want to do. But when that's not possible and we have to look at other permanency options, we have two: guardianship and adoption. And in the guardianship world, we have Title 13, and that's the traditional guardianship that you see done through the dependency court. But there is also Title 11, full guardianship of a minor. And when you hear me talking tonight, I want you to know that I am talking specifically about kids who are part of DCYF and they're part of an open dependency. This is not kids that because Title 11 occurs without DCYF, and sometimes it occurs in the front end of the case. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about permanency plans, two types of guardianships. Okay, so I also want to point out the colors to you. So through this, you will see that we've color coordinated some things. Anytime you see that teal, that's Title 13. Anytime you see that purple, it's Title 11. And anytime you see that pretty green, it is adoption related. So let's get started. So why do we talk about guardianship so much? Well, it's because we're required to. There was a law that was passed, and it requires DCYF to talk about guardianship as an alternative to terminating parental rights throughout the life of the case with the parents, with the caregivers, with the child if they're old enough. We have to talk about it. Now, always comes up, does that mean DCYF is only doing guardianships? No, we're doing what is in the best interest of a child. And so how do we get there? We have shared planning meetings and we talk. And, ooh, my slide moved. And we talk about what is in the best interest of the child, but we have to have all the options talked about. So that means talking about guardianship, talking about both types of guardianship, talking about adoption, talking about when DCYF isn't involved anymore, continuing with the relative search when a child isn't placed. We have to continue to talk about all of this stuff until we achieve permanency. But this is how we start the process. Now, I just want to start with some very simple definitions tonight. These are not legal definitions. These are not even policy definitions for those that I have staff here. These are just simple definitions about what a guardianship is and what an adoption is. So, a guardianship, it's just a legal arrangement. The court appoints somebody to make decisions for and takes action for somebody else. It's like a legal duty to that person. Whereas adoption it's permanent. It's the adoptive parents gain full parental rights. So that's our basic difference. So then we get asked this question all the time, which is better? I don't know. It's impossible for us to say. Every family is unique. Every family is different, has different circumstances. It's so important to consider all factors before we make any final decisions and come to what is in the best interest of the child, not so much as which is better, adoption or guardianship, but what is in the best interest of the child. So here are just some things to think about when you're trying to come up with those ideas. So, and these are just things to have you think about. There's no right or wrong answers to them, but think about, can you provide long-term care and support? Do you want a permanent legal relationship? Are you financially able to care for the child? Who is the child and youth connected to now? And how can we maintain those relationships? And should we maintain those relationships? Is the child or youth with their siblings? And is there a plan to keep them connected with the siblings if they're not together? Does the child or the youth have contact with their birth parents? Do they want to have contact with their birth parents? And then how does the child feel about adoption or guardianship? These are just all things that we just think about. And by all means, these are not the only things you take into consideration, just a couple. So tonight, what we're going to try to go through is legal custodian, adoptive parents' rights and responsibilities, parents' rights and responsibilities, post-permanency, what do those financial supports and services look like? Medical, I'm just going to tell you, medical is complicated. And so we're going to probably point you to that pamphlet, that new publication we put together. Post-permanency support effects on other public benefits. And then we'll talk a little bit about services post age 18. This is our lofty goal. This is our brand new publication. It is released out to the world. I know that Luann sent it out to you all. You all have the link so you can look at it, read it, dog ear it, whatever you want to do to it. But we're really excited. Lindsay, who is the program manager for adoption support, was so critical in helping put this together, but she's out on leave right now and wasn't able to come here today. So, but we couldn't have done this without adoption support's help and so many other people. So you have this. And then before we get going, I just want to point out a couple of resources that you have that I would encourage you to loop back to. So if you have more questions about guardianship, you would want to reach out to your guardianship gatekeeper, and they're in the regions. And you can reach out by their office. We will get you there. Or you can email dcyf.guardianship@dcyf.wa.gov, and we will get you to your right person if you have more questions. if you have legal questions about guardianship and you're a kinship caregiver, we have LARC. LARC is housed at the Seattle County Bar Association. They serve the entire state. It is free legal advice to kinship caregivers. I would encourage you to reach out to them if you're a caregiver, kinship caregiver. And then we also have some YouTube videos that were put together by the kinship caregiver legal advocate for the state, just overviews on what minor guardianship really is, what the emergency ones look like, and then some links to also just a couple of other YouTube videos that'll be helpful.
Jeannie, sorry, I was just going to add really quick, Jeannie, I'm sorry to interrupt. As Jeannie was saying, the publication, that comparison guide, is really, I mean, it is an in-depth publication with resources available, so much wonderful information. Like Jeannie said, Luann had sent that out prior to this presentation. I see Heidi included it in the chat. So that's wonderful. That's really, you know, a really good detailed publication of everything that we're going to discuss tonight. We're going to do our best to give a really good overview of adoption and guardianship. You know, the department really views adoption and guardianship both as permanent plans. And as Jeannie had said, it just depends on which is most appropriate for each individual child. I already saw a question in the chat, you know, about those conversations or shared planning meetings, and decisions really are made based on every child and their circumstance and what is best for them. And so the overview in terms of adoption and guardianship, our goal is to provide as much information to you while providing resources for you to refer back to. But in addition, Jeannie, myself, everyone in the adoption program, adoption support program, guardianship, I saw one of our wonderful permanency program managers out of Region 3, Heidi Pless. I'm going to throw her out here. All of us with the department are happy to speak with each of you, connect with you individually, and provide as much support as you need throughout this process. So this is a lot of information tonight, but we do have resources available. We're available. And so please don't feel too overwhelmed by the amount of information. We're going to make sure you have it all, and we can explain it all at the end and answer questions too. So just wanted to add that too, Jeannie. Sorry.
That's okay. I appreciate you looping back and saying some of that stuff. And I just want to say again, we're going to give you so much information tonight that you're just going to go, what? Refer back to the publication.
Yes.
Okay. Here
so
we
you
go.
want me to take this one, Jeannie? So, can we go back to adoption?
Yeah. Go back to your resources.
So this really talks more about adoption, but the links here are with regards to adoption support information and the post-adoptions question and answers booklet. So these are two really good resources that we have available with regards to adoption support. But our program has been really intentional about providing as many resources for information to share, right? So there's many opportunities. So in addition to these two opportunities, our website contacts, our website has a wealth of information. If you go to that, we cover as much as we can there. That question and answers booklet here is a real in-depth publication. We have informational sessions the first Wednesday of the month, which provide a general overview of our program, the benefits and limitations, and allows for question and answers. So we have a 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. session. You can sign up right on the front page of our website. That's the first Wednesday of every month. We have, let's see, there is an e-learning through the Alliance. It's a comprehensive 45-minute tutorial of our program. We also have an adoption support monthly digest and quarterly newsletter for families post-adoption. So lots and lots of resources available for the adoption support program. We want to connect with families prior to finalization. We want to connect with our families, you know, post-adoption as well. So lots and lots of opportunities there that I wanted to kind of expand on in addition to these links and resources provided here. Thanks, Jeannie.
Hey, I'm gonna next slide. Okay, we're gonna just start about generalizations, okay? Rights and responsibilities. So for both guardianships, generally, the guardian has physical and legal custody of the child, full care and responsibility for making decisions for the youth or the child, and that relationship exists up until the age of 18. The only difference between really 13 and 18 at this point of the game is when we're talking full guardianship is in a Title 11, the judge has the ability to say, okay, parents, you retain education and medical rights and decision-making. Guardian, you have care and authority over this. And they can split off the who has the decision rights. That's the biggest difference between the two at this point. Okay, adoption though.
Yeah, so with regards to adoptions, adoptive parents assume all parental rights. So they have all rights and responsibilities for the child. And when a child is adopted, they become a permanent legal member of that family. Adoption is a lifelong commitment. We refer to it a lot in adoption. Adoption support is finding your forever family. And so some different legalities there, but both permanent plans.
So then what are the birth parents' rights and responsibilities? Well, with guardianship, the parents' rights are typically not terminated. And I say typically because we don't terminate in guardianship parental rights, but every once in a while, a legally free child ends up in a guardianship. And so the parental rights are already terminated, but we do not terminate parental rights. So what about adoption?
Yeah, so with regards to adoptions, parental rights are severed or terminated. So biological parents no longer have parental rights. In some cases, there is open communication or open adoption agreements, and that's just that is an agreement between an adoptive family and the biological parent. So the department isn't necessarily a party to that action, but we do help facilitate and have conversations around open adoption agreements. So every situation looks different. Some, children have more familial contact or parental contact than others. And typically an adoptive family or adoptive parent would have some legal guidance with an adoption attorney to kind of make those decisions and propose agreements if that's appropriate.
And then with guardianship, visitation is on the table for birth parents in most cases. And the only reason it wouldn't be is if the judge ordered no visitation, or if parental rights had been terminated already. So finalizing the permanency plan, we talked a little bit about this earlier. In a Title 13, it's part of the dependency process. The guardian doesn't have to go hire an attorney to finalize it. It's taken care of during the normal court dependency process. And but we always encourage people to, if you have questions, you should probably ask an attorney. Whereas the Title 11 guardianships, to initiate them, a guardian or doesn't have to be the guardian, but a guardian files a petition in Superior Court. And it's not just guardians, it can be the child, it could be a friend of the family who wants to help this person become the guardian. It's pretty lenient on who can file. But what is important to know is DCYF does not file the Title 11 petition. And in these cases, remember, I'm talking about the cases that have an open dependency case. And so in dependency matters, when there is one, concurrent jurisdiction has to be filed and agreed upon before it can proceed. And then the petitioner becomes responsible for filing and serving and all of the stuff that goes with that. Okay, how about adoptions? What do you guys have to do?
Yes, thanks, Jeannie. So adoptive families typically do retain an adoption attorney. And when you're going through the adoption process and you're assigned a social service specialist that specializes in finalizing adoptions, those workers have different titles statewide. And so I'll refer to them as social service specialists. But typically they work with or know of adoption attorneys that that finalize state adoptions, and so they can connect you with adoption attorneys. We don't choose attorneys for you, but we're happy to provide information based on, your region or city that you reside in, and help support that process. And so, yes, most adoptive families do retain an adoption attorney through the adoption support program. One of the benefits is reimbursement of non-recurring costs up to $1,500 per child. And those are costs directly related to finalizing an adoption. And so many of our families utilize that reimbursement to pay towards adoption attorney fees. And so, yes, that's for adoption.
Thanks. So, child support enforcement. This kind of comes up every once in a while for guardianships. So in a Title 13 guardianship, that's the one that's done in dependency court, DCYF does not seek child support against the parent. We do not do that. However, there are some federal programs that may require child support if the guardian accesses them, like TANF or food benefits, things like that. They might require child support be paid by the parent, but DCYF does not require it. Now, Title 11 is a little bit different. Title 11 has in it where you can have the judge can order birth parents to pay child support to the guardian. And then also, if the guardian applies for a public benefit that requires child support be collected, that also would happen. So what about adoption? Do you have child support?
No. There could be back child support that is required, but no, once a child is adopted and the biological parents no longer have parental rights, then there is no child support to be ordered post-adoption. No. I don't want to ignore the questions in the chat. We will get to those at the end.
Yeah, we're going to do those at the end.
Yeah.
And just a reminder, guys, we cannot answer case-specific questions at all. Only general questions. Visitation. I talked briefly about this, but again, visitation occurs. Visitation orders we have to address visitation between the child and the biological parents unless the court determines otherwise, no. And then the visits become the responsibility of the guardian and the biological parent.
Yeah, so for adoption, like we discussed earlier, some families enter into an open adoption agreement with the biological parent or parents. And so that is an agreement between the adoptive parents and the biological parents, and it is their responsibility to maintain that agreement moving forward.
Changing the child's name. So this is new for guardianship. So effective July 23rd, 2023, a new law went into effect, and you find it under RCW 4.24130. Oddly, it's called Action for Change of Name, and it's under the fees category, which is a weird place, I think, to put it, but that's where it is. And it says that a guardian can change the child's name under certain conditions. And so a guardian can apply to change the name of a child. Now, the birth parents' names remain on the birth certificate, but the child's name would be different. And that's done through district court. What about adoption?
Yeah, so for adoption, as listed here, when you are finalizing an adoption, you can change your child's name depending upon the child's age and preference, and through permanency discussions. Sometimes your social service specialist or adoption finalizer will have more in-depth discussion about what that looks like or what's appropriate for the child. But ultimately, as a parent, you make that decision. And post-adoption, there would be a new birth certificate with your name on it as the adoptive parent. And so that does change.
So this comes up from time to time, modifications and terminations. And this is pretty complex. And really the best thing to do would be either to look a little bit closer at the new publication or reach out to LARC with really specific questions about that. But generally speaking, both types of guardianships can be dismissed if the parent can show that their parenting deficiencies have been corrected, and it's in the best interest of the child to go home. It's not an easy thing to do. It's pretty complicated, but it is possible. Also, modification includes visitation because the visitation is part of a court order. If the visitation plan needs to change, it needs to be done through modification through the courts, not just done, which is one of the reasons why when we do visitation plans, we encourage you to just kind of be very general with your visitation because it's easy for you to add. It's a little bit harder to take away. What about adoptions?
Yeah, so for adoption, I mean, that is essentially permanence in every sense of the word. So, so no, birth parents cannot come back and seek custody of the child once parental rights are terminated. And adoption finalization occurs. The adoptive parent is the parent.
Okay, so changing the permanent plan once dependency is dismissed. You would be amazed this comes up often. So, for example, I have a guardianship and now I've decided I'm going to adopt the child. Well, that's fine. You are perfectly able to do that. But once the adoption has occurred, that means you can't receive a gap subsidy if you've been doing that. And so, and adoptions isn't going to help with the fees, like Lindsay, oh my gosh, with what Kate was saying earlier about how they can help towards the adoption fees. They can't help towards those. So adoption, and I just have to say this, and I always compare it to like you can't change a pickle back into a cucumber once it's become a pickle. You cannot change an adoptive parent into a guardian later. It's just not possible. And then lastly, this is something new for us, but with young adults who have been receiving a gap subsidy, those young adults, if they are adopted after the age of 18, they will still remain eligible if they meet the other eligibility guidelines for extended guardianship assistance program. So we're excited about that. And let's see. Next slide, inheritances and beyond. So this is also complicated, but generally speaking, in a guardianship, the child does not automatically inherit from the guardian. There has to be a will to be able to inherit the estate. The child continues to be able to automatically inherit from the birth parents, but not the guardian. Go ahead, Kate. I don't know why I'm trying to call you Lindsay too
That's
much.
okay. That's
You're
okay.
good
We
company.
usually do everything together. It's one of us, so
Oh.
that's totally fine. So with adoption, this would be the same as if your birth child, it's same as birth child rights. So your adoptive child legally has inheritance rights. All of that, like Jeannie said, it can get a little bit difficult. And so I don't want to get into the legalities of it. But it's always important to do proper planning around this, adoptive child or not, or biological child or not. Always good to plan in these circumstances through an estate will or what have you. Just makes it a little bit easier. But through adoption, it is your child and they would have the same rights as your biological children.
Okay, deep breath. Shoo. Now we're going to move into the post-permanency subsidy and more part of this. So we're going to kick off with the GAP subsidy. Eligibility for GAP, Guardianship Assistance Program. It used to be affectionately known as the RGAP program, Relative Guardianship Assistance Program, but we had a new law passed, and it allowed us to open up eligibility to a lot more than just relatives. So the eligibility requirements in short are a child has to be in a dependent type action within the juvenile court. The child has been placed in the approved home of the proposed guardian for at least 6 months, consecutive months while under the jurisdiction of the juvenile court. There's also a, unless everybody else agrees to waive that timeline, but that is not the same as the next statement. And then the proposed guardian is granted at a minimum the kinship license and has cared for the child for at least 6 consecutive months post licensing. The 6 consecutive months post licensing is not waivable. It is a hard and fast rule. And when we say kinship license, I have to specify that because we also have the initial license. And the initial license is only valid for 90 days, and it's really more akin to a permit and not a license. And so the 3 months, the 90 days that you can have an initial license does not count towards the 6 months. And then there's the big or, and that is if the child is placed with a guardian who is already receiving a gap subsidy for the benefit of a child's sibling. And then I just take opportunity to say this as often as I can to as many people as I can. The guardian must enter into the subsidy agreement prior to the establishment of the guardianship. That part is so critical. When we don't do it in that order, it makes it very difficult for us to be able to provide the subsidy. And in fact, you will receive a denial letter and you're eligible to go through an appeal process, but you're not guaranteed the subsidy if the guardianship finalizes before the gap subsidy is signed. So, but what about those Title 11s, the ones that are done in Superior Court, that little outside of the dependency court proper? And those two are eligible for a gap subsidy as long as they meet all of the eligibility criteria that's listed there over on the left. And so if you have a child that's part of a dependency, being overseen by juvenile court, they've been with the placement for at least 6 months, and the placement has been licensed for at least 6 consecutive months for that child, then they're likely eligible for a guardianship subsidy. Okay, the adoption support eligibility.
Okay, so eligibility requires that a youth must be less than 18 years old, be legally free for adoption or eligible for a customary adoption, be placed with a family that has an approved adoption home study, and meet special needs criteria. And so that requires that a child must have a special factor or condition, which we'll get into. The state has determined that the child cannot or should not be returned to the home of the legal parent, and the Department of Child Placing Agency has documented the reasonable but unsuccessful effort was made to place the child for adoption without adoption support. This would be except where it's against the child's best interest to search. So this would be, an example would be if a child is with a relative or has been in a home for at least 3 months prior to becoming legally free. In terms of those special factors or conditions, a child must have one or more of the following factors or conditions to be considered special needs. So of a minority ethnic background, 6 years of age or older, a member of a sibling group of 3 or more, a member of a sibling group in which one or more of the siblings meets the definition of special needs, diagnosed with a physical, mental, developmental, cognitive, or emotional disability, or is at risk of a diagnosis of physical, mental, developmental, cognitive, or emotional disability. And so determining eligibility and meeting eligibility requirements, your social service specialist that finalizes adoptions and the assigned adoption support program consultant, we work together to make children eligible, right? So we determine the eligibility. So there's a lot that goes into eligibility, but we work through this process, and it's nothing necessarily for you to be concerned about, but we just like families aware, and we like to give you all of the information, and then we work through it for you. Was there a second slide? I'm not as familiar. I'm sorry. Okay, no,
Mm-mm.
okay.
That was
Thanks,
it.
Jeannie.
So now we get into the nitty-gritty, the monthly financial assistance determination. You will see they pretty much are alike. So the for guardianship, the most that a gap subsidy, monthly cash subsidy can be, um, it cannot exceed the amount that the child be eligible for in a foster care maintenance payment. And per law, it has to be negotiated at 80, 90, or 95% of the foster care maintenance payment based on the child's age, depending upon the age at the time of guardianship. And that's how we actually calculate it. But it also is about what are the needs of the child? What does the child need to be able, what does the family need to be able to support that child? It is a negotiation, and we have processes that we go through. Lindsay? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna keep doing
Okay,
this.
that's okay. Okay, so for adoption support, so similar, right? Both programs are required to negotiate within those legislative maximums allowed based on those foster care maintenance payments or that rate structure. And of course, that structure changed as of January 1st. But our processes and procedures have not. So the overall intention of adoption support payments is to combine with a family's own resources as well as community resources to assist in covering the ordinary and special needs of each child. So the extent of assistance is determined through discussion and negotiation between the adoptive parents and the adoption support program consultant, and is based off the circumstances of each family and the needs of each child. We can't cover every expense, but our program can assist in offsetting costs related to meeting each child's needs.
So other parts about the permanency, about post-permanency subsidy. I like to call them the add-ons, but they're not. They're just part of the subsidy. So for a gap subsidy, the benefits also include medical coverage, reimbursement towards any legal expenses for establishing the guardianship, and that is up to $2,000. And then all of this has to be negotiated prior to the expense. And then again, the monthly cash subsidy has to be 80, 90, 95% of the foster care maintenance payment. And that is handled by our guardianship gatekeepers out in the region. And they meet with the families. You fill out an application and a worksheet, and you sit down and you talk through what you may or may not need. And that's how we arrive. What about adoption?
Yeah, so once a youth is determined eligible for the program, families are automatically able to receive medical and dental services through Medicaid, mental health services through Medicaid, and then also a financial support through our pre-authorization for counseling. And so we can pay providers directly if they take our adoption support rate. If you're working with a provider and your child has an established relationship with a provider that doesn't take Medicaid but will take our state rate, we can pay that provider directly through our pre-authorization for counseling. There's that reimbursement of non-recurring costs, which is directly related to finalizing an adoption or costs related to finalizing an adoption, right? And then the monthly cash payment is negotiated based off of the circumstances of the family and needs of the child, as we just previously discussed. So those are the benefits, or just some of the benefits actually, of the adoption support program.
So then we talk a little bit about successor guardians. So adoption support, they don't have successor guardians, but guardianship does. And so when you're completing your application for the GAP subsidy, we ask you to name a successor guardian in case of death or incapacitation. The GAP eligibility subsidy can transfer to the successor guardian if they are named on the GAP agreement and then become the legal guardian. And if something happens to the original legal guardian, the successor guardian is not required to be licensed. They are not required to have a home study, but they do have to establish legal guardianship through the courts, and all adults in the home have to be able to pass a background check for us to be able to provide them with the gap subsidy to support the child. Kate, what about adoptions? I know adoption support does.
Yes, so we don't have that, but the adoption support agreement is a contract between the adoptive parent and the department. And so those benefits and all the components of that contract can only be provided to the youth through that adoptive parent listed on the agreement. And so we do work with families. We have over 16,000 youth on the program, and so many different family circumstances and unique situations that we're talking through and problem solving daily. And so the overall answer is no, we don't have a successor guardians, but we do support our families, during times of crisis and through unique situations, we'll say. So yes, so that's the long of the short answer.
So let's get into medical. So guardianship and medical and the gap subsidy is kind of complicated, and I'm gonna refer you everything that is in the PowerPoint is in the publication, and so you can go back and look at it. So for youth with gap, medical and dental coverage is provided, and it's specified in the gap agreement. Coordinated care may continue to be available, but it's limited to Washington state. So if you move out of Washington, we can no longer guarantee that medical coverage. You'd need to first apply for Medicaid coverage for the child or the youth that's in the state you're residing in. This is also why we say to you, before you move out of state, please reach out to us so we can help you. And then adoption support, they have the prepaid beds. Guardianship does not. And so you can access counseling and other evidence-based programs by calling in an intake and going through the family voluntary services. It's not as smooth, it's a little clunky, but it is available. But if you also have a Medicaid card for the child, the coordinated care, you will be able to use that also for mental health coverage. Not covered, though, is group homes, treatment facilities, but you might be able to still access CLIP and WISE through Medicaid. And it would go for either type of guardianship if there was a gap subsidy. Adoption. Kate.
Yes. So as I said earlier, all children who are eligible for adoption support in Washington are eligible for Medicaid. So families, if typically children are on coordinated care of Washington when they're dependent, and that same coverage and support can continue post-adoption if families choose to maintain the state coverage as their primary insurance. So we work really close with Coordinated Care of Washington, and we refer families there regularly. They're able to assist in establishing a Medicaid footprint if necessary. So they're a wonderful resource that our families use regularly with that with coordinated care as their primary. Families may also choose to enroll their child in their private insurance, and that insurance is then considered their primary per Medicaid requirements. So with dual coverage, Medicaid can be billed for any remaining costs up to the maximum allowable Medicaid rate if the provider is contracted with both the private insurance and Medicaid. So it can get a little bit confusing. So for all questions regarding Medicaid, we refer to our families to our foster care and adoption support team. And they are the experts in Medicaid. We work with them regularly. They're wonderful. So we all have their phone number and extension memorized. We're giving that out regularly. And so if we don't have specific questions about Medicaid coverage, we always know where to direct you to get those questions answered. And so we do that daily with the wonderful families that we serve.
I would also say the same would go for guardianship and medical, because we work very closely with our foster care medical team. They are so knowledgeable, and they really are the experts. So we try to connect folks. So back over to the private health insurance. Gosh, it's really kind of complicated for guardians and private health insurance. So while adoptions has it kind of easy. You can put a child on your private health insurance because they're like your birth child, right? Not so much for a guardianship for Title 13 or 11. It's kind of a big depends. It's up to the employer and how they set up the insurance for you. And so you need to check with the private insurance carrier before anything to see if you're eligible to put the child onto your private insurance. And then just like in adoptions, if they are eligible for the private insurance, then it becomes double coverage and the private insurance then becomes primary and then Medicaid becomes secondary. So very similar. Let's see, moving out of state, just very generally, please, if you move out of state, the gap agreement will remain in effect and you will still receive your monthly cash payments. However, it gets a little complicated with the medical stuff, so we ask that you let us know ASAP so we can help through that process. But you also, when you sign the agreement, there's a little line in there that says you are required to notify the GAP program in writing if there is any change in your permanent address. And so just be reminded that you do need to let us know. Kate, what about adoption?
Yeah, so for adoption support, very similar. The adoption support agreement does require that families update the program with regards to changes in circumstances, and address change would be included. Very important for a number of reasons. First of all, parents typically do want that payment to follow the child if they're moving, but also for Medicaid coverage, because we do have the ability to request reciprocal Medicaid coverage, and there's a program manager that specifically oversees all of that. And I think we have all but 4 states that will take that reciprocal medical coverage. And so very important for you to communicate with the assigned adoption support program consultant so we can help navigate that for you in anticipation of a move so that it's all set up. You never want to move and then not be able to get prescriptions. And we speak with families in those cases as well. And it's definitely a stress that we want to avoid for everyone.
Definitely. Well, here we go. Take a deep breath and we're going to change directions on you guys again. So now we're going to talk about how does GAP subsidy or adoption support affect other public benefit programs? And I have to say this to you. The information we're providing you and the information that's in the publication, it was current at the time that we did this, but please contact each benefit program directly for questions and more information about their eligibility changes, because sometimes they have laws and rules that change for them too. So, TANF, temporary assistance for needy families. So there's 2 types of TANF. There's the non-needy TANF and there's the needy TANF. If you are receiving a GAP subsidy, you are not eligible to receive a non-needy TANF grant for that child. They come out of the same pot of money, the same Social Security pot of money. And so you however, you are eligible to apply for needy TANF if you so need so. It is income-based. The GAP benefits are not supposed to be counted towards household income. And we've put the link in if you wanted to apply for TANF benefits. Okay, so what about adoptions, Kate?
Yeah, so similar. Once a child is adopted, then the adoptive parents are the legal parents, so they could apply for TANF, but not that non-needy relative TANF grant is sometimes what we call it. So very similar.
So then there's SNAP, also the state food benefits. SNAP, we have no control over SNAP. SNAP counts everything. Okay, all income gets counted by SNAP. So a family may apply for food benefits, but the guardian's income is going to be used to to determine the household's eligibility for SNAP. Gap assistance payment is going to be counted as income into the home, and it will also be used to determine SNAP benefits. SNAP is run by the Farm Bureau, and they just count everything is all I can say. What about you, Kate? I think it's the same.
Yeah, it's the same. And like you said earlier, with all public benefits, we try to provide as much information to our families as possible, but we do refer all of our families to the experts, whether it be Social Security, whether it be, applying for benefits. We just want to make sure that they're getting the best information as possible, and providing all of that information to those specialists that are making those determinations is very, very important.
Yes, definitely. So then there's also the WIC program. And so you may be eligible for WIC, but this one, we really would just encourage you to reach out to WIC directly and work with them through the eligibility process. There's also free and reduced school meals. And so across the board, we're all the same on this. So children who exit foster care into a permanency plan are eligible for the rest of the school year. So like if they exit, say, in February and the rest of the school year, they're still eligible for free and reduced lunches. But after that, the following year, the parent, guardian, adoptive parent income is going to be used to determine eligibility. And then working child care connections, there is a difference between guardianship and adoption. And I want to be careful when I say this. So there is a Working Child Care Connections program for the state of Washington, WCCC, and it is a subsidy for childcare. And what they have recently done a year ago is they made it so if you are a guardian, subsidy, work child subsidy, you will be eligible because they don't count your income. They only consider the child's income, but you have to be in an approved work activity. So what is an approved work activity? So unfortunately, if it's a household where you have two grandparents who are retired, those are not work activities. A work activity is literally somebody is working or somebody is reducing barriers to work. And there's a whole list of them, but there has to be something. And so you may be eligible. But the other part of this, and I don't say this very often, but for all of those informal kinship caregivers out there who are not part of the DCYF system, they also are eligible for this childcare subsidy. Even if they don't have a full guardianship, even if they're taking care of their sister's child because they dropped the child off to them, they too would be eligible for child care benefits. Okay, Kate, what about adoption?
Yeah, so similar. So once an adoption is finalized and a dependency is dismissed, the department will no longer pay directly for childcare. So with our families that we serve prior to finalization and then post-adoption, we have lots of conversations about what is needed and what expenses are directly related to your child's needs currently. And so childcare can be a barrier. Now we can't, like I said, we can't directly pay for or consider childcare. However, when we negotiate a monthly payment for adoption support, families are able to utilize that monthly payment however necessary. So we have a lot of families that when they're adopting younger kiddos will put either majority or all of that monthly maintenance or monthly payment towards childcare. And then as they get older, obviously you wouldn't be putting that towards childcare. They kind of utilize it however needed. So we don't directly pay for childcare, but there is support. We also work really closely with the adoption program because they do support their families in applying for working connections prior to adoption finalization, because the child's income is then considered and could be eligible for 12 months of childcare. And then after that 12 months, it would be redetermined, and then the parent's income would be considered as well. But most of our families have gotten those 12 months post-adoption, which has been really helpful.
So then Head Start is a little bit complicated. And so what we really encourage you to do is, number one, access it. Head Start and Early Head Start, wonderful programs, and we should be taking advantage of them. And we have given you the information, the links, and we would really
Ooh, Jeannie, Jeannie, you might want to go off camera real quick because it's kind of delayed. You might have low bandwidth, so you might want to go off camera, but
okay.
Sorry.
That's okay, maybe. I can't figure out here it is. Okay, so like I was saying, Head Start, we would really encourage you to apply. And they should be just using the child's income, but their process changes a little bit, so we would encourage you just to reach out to them. Okay. Yep. Okay, here we go. This is the hard stuff. And what I'm going to say to you is, guys, Social Security is complex. It is incredibly complex when it comes to guardianship, when it comes to adoption. And so what we really would encourage you to do is contact your local Social Security Administration or visit their webpage to see what it says. We've pulled some information together, but truly it is so complicated. So in general, let me just start with retirement, disability, survivor benefits. It's all complicated. And so when it comes to retirement benefits, children are not eligible for a guardian's retirement benefits. That is probably the one area that's pretty black and white. Although I will say to you, there is a bill in Congress right now that's trying to change it, but it has not yet changed. And they've been trying for many years to change it. The disability or survivor benefits of the birth parent, the children are eligible to receive those. The child remains eligible to receive any of the Social Security benefits that are based on their birth parent's work record, because unlike an adoption, they still are the parents. The parents' rights have not been terminated, so they would still be eligible for all of those services. Okay, adoption. This one's yours.
Yeah, so when we speak with families, we're working with families prior to adoption finalization, and then the bulk of our work is post-adoption. So we have thousands of families and youth on our program post-adoption, and so the conversations that we have around Social Security, it just kind of depends on if you have finalized your adoption yet or not. And so we, like Jeannie had said, we always refer families to Social Security to get information. We connect families there. We also have Social Security specialists within DCYF. And so we get you the information that you need, and we try to give as much information as possible, but each situation can be so different. And so we provide more guidance on case-specific issues, but then also always, defer to those Social Security experts and Social Security Administration for all of those complex questions and needs beyond what we can provide.
Okay, so let's get even more complex with this. The child's disability benefits. If the child qualifies for Social Security based on their own disability, once guardianship happens, it's means tested. I don't know if you guys realize that, but it is child disabilities and adult disabilities, they're means tested. And so they use the guardian's finances to make those determinations. A guardian can receive both GAP and Social Security payments, but this is the big but, you have to report the financial support through of GAP to Social Security Administration. And they will take it into consideration and probably reduce what the actual disability benefit would have been based on the gap subsidy. So, but you are required to report it. How about adoption?
Yeah, very similar. So you're always going to want to report that it's combined resources, right? Combined support. And so you're going to want to report that to Social Security Administration.
Okay, let's see. Title II. So Title II Social Security benefits are based on the disability, the retirement, or the death of the biological parent. And like I was saying earlier, they may still be available post permanency in a guardianship. And it's just a matter of checking. And so the gap is negotiated based on the child's needs and whatever the family has available to reasonably support the child. And so all of that might get taken into consideration from Social Security Administration. So again, we just say to you, Kate and I are not Social Security experts. We would encourage you to reach out to them. We understand it's very difficult to get a walk-in appointment and that you have to really go in and schedule an appointment to be able to talk to anybody, but that's really your best bet if you need more information about Social Security. How about adoption?
Yep, similar. I can't reiterate it enough. Like Jeannie had said, and I had said earlier, we always want you to check in regarding SSI or Social Security Administration for specific questions. But with regards to Title II benefits, we have conversations with families regarding resources available to them through those benefits, and then make the determinations throughout our negotiation and discussion for a monthly payment through adoption support. Based on that, every situation, like I said, is different, and so try to give kind of a high level overview. But yes, we do have to consider those benefits.
And then our last Social Security slide is about what if the guardian or the adopted parents are receiving disability. And so what you need to know is Social Security may consider gap subsidy or adoption support as income when you're determining benefits. I can tell you that for gap, they'll disregard $25 and count the rest of the gap dollar for dollar against the disability payment of the guardian. It seems a bit excessive to me, but it is their rule and there isn't much we can do about that. And it's the same for adoption. Okay, deep breath. We got through that section. Now we're going to move on to post subsidies for youth who are over 18. So the Extended Guardianship Assistance Program and the Extended Adoption Support Program. So we'll start with the Extended Guardianship Program. We affectionately call it EGAP. And EGAP is available regardless. And this is a big change. So those of you who are maybe very familiar with this changed a year ago. Regardless of the child's age at the time the guardianship is finalized, they may be eligible to receive EGAP support until they're 21, as long as they meet the eligibility requirements. It used to be they had to have had their guardianship established after 16, but that went away a year ago. So there is a joint application process between the guardian and the youth, and and one of the other eligibility criteria is they have to have received a gap subsidy prior to their 18th birthday. And then they also have to meet one of the 5 activities. So the 5 activities are either enrolled in high school or high school equivalency, enrolled or has applied for and can show timely enrollment in post-secondary, so in college or a vocational program, or they're participating in a program to promote or remove employment barriers, which also includes part-time employment. I think a great example of participating in a program to remove barriers is like Job Corps. That's a great example of one. And then they also could be employed for 80 hours or more, or they could be unable to engage in any of the above because of a documented medical condition. But they have to meet those eligibility and continue to provide verification every 6 months. And then youth also might be eligible to apply for TANF or state family assistance. It's called SFA through the community service office, where you go and apply for TANF for a little bit of money also. So that's another option for our families. So those are the eligibility for our EGAP. How about post-adoption support?
Yes. So for youth adopted prior to the age of 16, as long as they're attending full-time high school or GED program and continue to receive financial support and legal status hasn't changed, then we can extend adoption support. So we have lots of kiddos that turn 18 during their senior year, and we extend to graduation. So anticipated graduation date of, end of June. So we do that quite a bit. We contact our families 3 months prior to a youth turning 18. The adoption support agreement or contract kind of outlines all of this, but we do connect with families just to kind of give them a reminder. A lot of our families have adopted years ago and don't necessarily remember all of the different pieces and components. And so we want to connect with those families and ensure that we're able to extend that adoption support through graduation, as that applies for most of our youth. For youth adopted at the age of 16 or older, they may be eligible for extended adoption support. And so the 5 criteria that Jeannie had listed earlier all apply here as well. In addition to, the youth needs to continue to receive financial support from their adoptive parents. So we have to have sufficient documentation indicating that the youth is still supported financially by their parent. And so then we can extend those youth. None of our youth can extend past 21 years of age on the program.
So Kate, let me ask you a question. I didn't go over this on my slide, but when post-adoption support continues, does the money go to the youth or to the adoptive parent?
It goes to the adoptive parent, and that's why we have that additional criteria there, because our adoption support agreement is a contract between the adoptive parent and the department. And so we pay the adoptive parent or parents directly, and that support is meant to go towards the child. And so that's why we do additional conversation with regards to how that financial support is going to the youth.
And the same would hold true for the EGAP. So we are the same there. Okay, so now, if you have questions, this is our comparison guide. We would encourage you to do this. I cannot believe it. We got through it in an hour and 15 minutes, which means now we have 45 minutes where you can just simply ask us questions. We really do appreciate you hanging in all of this time.